So, is this a step forward in the fight against crime, or a piece of gesture politics, petty censorship for no valid reason? Let me introduce our guests. Hamish Brown was for 30 years one of Scotland Yard's chief investigators of rape and violent crime, and he's with me here at our central London studio and top left of your screen. Aridan Carroll is a feminist writer. She's in our central London studio, top right of your screen. Deborah Hyde is from a group called Unfettered, which celebrates bondage and sadomasochism. She's joining us also from another camera in our central London studio, bottom left of your screen. And a viewer joins us on the phone, John Bayer, a campaigner for family values in the media. Bottom right of screen is John. Hamish, top left. Let's start with you, if I may. The argument goes, because of this hideous crime, other people, if they consume this stuff, if they watch this stuff, they may become criminals themselves. Do you believe that?
Yes, I do. I think there's a great danger there. Of course, I'm a retired police officer and I've dealt with many murders. I'm not a psychologist, but from my experience, there is good anecdotal evidence of people who have watched this material. And I'm not talking about a nanny state. This is the top-level stuff we're dealing with. Some dreadful, depraved activities and people, and they have gone out to reenact what they've previously terribly important. And that is the people who take part in these videos, in these images. And what we have, often very vulnerable people, the people who we often see turn to prostitution and things like this. They don't consent to these things really, and in fact in law they can't consent to anything other than a common assault. For them to be beaten up or even murdered in some instances, no one can possibly agree to that. So we're looking at the vulnerability being taken advantage of, and I think that's terribly important. And other issues, when this material is at large, we have things like stalking, a subject I've actually as a police officer and now in consultancy are concentrated on. These images are often forced onto people on their mobiles, on their websites, on their internet and what have you. So I think there are many, many aspects here we can take forward. So I think it's a very important bit of legislation, and it's bridged that gap. It's not a matter about reproducing, it's not about distributing, which is the law at the moment. It is that gap in the law to actually possess. So I think it's sensible legislation.
We can ask you maybe as a former police officer how difficult it might be to prosecute people in a moment. But Deborah Hyde, you're joining us from this group called Unfettered. What's your take on this new suggestion?
I think some of the arguments that are being used are actually onerous and probably dangerous to society. I think to assume that looking at pornography is the cause of these acts of violence is to ignore the actual causes, is to deter resources away from the actual causes of violence.
Well, I don't think Hamish is turning away from anything. He's just saying anecdotal evidence exists. If you consume this stuff, you may become a criminal.
His anecdotal evidence does, but 60 years of research into the field doesn't. The government says in the paper that they have no evidence that this kind of material causes crime. If the government can't do that, if leading researchers in 60 years can't do that, for a policeman or anybody else to believe anecdotal evidence, and for us to change our laws, to give up our freedoms, to inaugurate thought crime on anecdotal evidence, for me would be a step too far.
Do you believe anything goes?
I don't believe anything goes, of course not. I believe that consent should be the criteria on which we decide things. The problem with the proposals as they are today is that if people who are looking at images don't know whether or not there was a crime caused, and I believe it's only if they know that there's a crime caused that they themselves have committed a crime. If they're looking at an image, and 25% of British people look at pornography, and they're not all rapists, much of pornography has been liberalised over the last 3 years. That's not caused a tremendous increase in rape, even though the gang rape videos are one of the most popular kind of videos you can buy. We can't just go on anecdotal evidence. We have to look at whether or not people are consenting to be in the films. Many people choose to be in the sex industry. To say they're all victims is a fallacy. Well, and I think we have to be very careful, as Benjamin Franklin said. So if we're going to give up our liberty just for the sake of a perceived threat, and I can't remember his name, but he was just talking about necrophilia. There has never been a snuff movie found, and yet we are threatened by the suggestion there are snuff movies around, and therefore we should give up our freedoms to protect ourselves from things that have never been proven.
Jane Longhurst's mother has worked tirelessly for the last 3 years to disagree with you. Aridan Carroll is a feminist writer. That's our title we've given you. Explain your point of view in all this.
Well, Deborah's right. There isn't any evidence that this material is causing any actual harm. We get this whenever there's a new technology, or whenever there's a new medium, whenever there's a new horrific crime. We get this call for censorship, this idea that somehow it's media that's creating the problems in society. But if you actually look around at what's going on, you find that these aren't new, these crimes aren't new, nothing new is happening. What's happening is, rather than actually investigate what the sources are of these problems that people have that cause them to create violence, instead we have calls for censorship, which are a nice way to paper over the fact that we still haven't dealt with the problem, that we keep creating these people who commit these terrible crimes. The internet did not make this person obsessed with
these. No, but it makes it more available, doesn't it?
Sorry?
It makes it more available. And we're not talking about top-shelf naughty magazines here,
I understand
aren't we?
that.
We're talking about serious, which most people, I would venture to suggest, would call depraved behaviour of the worst kind, being promulgated in a way that it was never been more easy to get hold of, if you want to get hold of it.
It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't create more crime.
Okay,
what it does is creates a new class of criminal.
John Bayer, bring us your point of view.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I think that this consultation was a very worthwhile exercise, because what it's thrown up in this report that's published today is that it says that many felt that the proposal should go much further and that tighter restriction on all pornography should be imposed. That is our view, and in our submission to the Home Office we said that the scope of the consultation should be much wider than just dealing with these appalling images of necrophilia and so forth. We wanted the government to consider the hardcore pornography that is currently classified at R18 by the British Board of Film Classification, and I do think that we have to have our feet on the ground about this. I think that some of the remarks that you have made about the widespread availability of this material on the internet makes it a far more serious problem than it's ever been before. And what we would like to know is why such material is available on the net at all, and how is it that the government is not taking action against the telecoms companies and the internet service providers who make this material available?
Well, hang on, John. That's a whole different ballgame, because a lot of it is hosted on sites way out of this country,
well, then
and it's pretty difficult to
an international agreement about what content is unacceptable.
Okay, but we'll come back to this with our guests and with your good self in just a moment. But let's pause. 8:45.